You feel everything, even what isn't yours. You walk into a room and your chest tightens. Someone's sadness, someone's rage, you don't know whose, but it lands on you like a silent storm. You say you're tired, but it's not your body that's exhausted. It's your soul, soaked through by emotions you didn't ask to carry. You've learned to smile through it, to be the strong one, the listener, the peacekeeper, but inside, you're crumbling. You tell yourself it's empathy. That being this open, this attuned, this broken, it means you're good. But what if that's not true? What if your gift is being used against you, not by others, but by something deeper, something older? There's a kind of pain no one warns you about, the kind that isn't even yours, and yet it lives in your chest like it was born there. If any part of this feels familiar, then stay, because this isn't just about feeling deeply. It's about finally understanding why you feel at all. And more importantly, how to stop drowning in what was never yours to begin with. She stands alone on the bridge. Her name is Alina. The mist curls around her feet like memory, and where her eyes should be, there is only stillness. She holds out her trembling hands, as if reaching for something, or maybe warding something off. She cannot see the pain, but she feels it, all of it, and her body bears each ache like a wound carved into silence. You see, Alina is not broken. She is not crazy. She is not too sensitive. She is an empath, but not the kind the world celebrates in quotes and greeting cards. She is the kind who wakes in the middle of the night with a sorrow she cannot name. The kind who walks into a room and tastes a fight that happened hours ago. The kind who cries for people who are no longer alive, or never were. If this sounds like you, I want you to know something. You are not weak. You are not making it up. And you are not alone, but you are, perhaps, unaware, not of your feelings. No, you feel plenty. You're unaware of the threshold you've crossed, because this is not just emotion. This is archetypal inheritance. This is psychic transmission. Alina doesn't just feel people's sadness. She becomes it, she breathes it, and she bleeds for it, without knowing where she ends and where the other begins. She never asked for this. No empath ever does. It begins slowly, like fog settling in your chest, and before you realize it, you're a vessel filled with stories you never lived, wounds you never earned, and shadows that don't carry your name. Some will say, set boundaries. But how do you draw a line through the middle of your chest? How do you say, this is mine, when everything inside you feels like a borrowed ache? No one taught Alina that empathy could be dangerous, that it could devour you in the name of compassion, that it could twist your kindness into a kind of spiritual erosion. But maybe that's why you're here, because somewhere in you something's whispering, I can't carry all of this anymore. And it's true, you can't, because it was never meant to live in you. But before we can release what was never ours, we have to name it. And to name it, we must descend So step onto the bridge with Elena, not to save her, but to remember what she forgot, that even the most open heart needs a spine. That's where the real journey begins. His name is Charlie. He was 5 the first time he felt it. He walked into the kitchen one afternoon, sunlight falling on the floor like spilled honey. His mother was chopping carrots. She looked normal, calm, even, but something in the air bent. He froze, his chest tightened. And without knowing why, he said, "Are you mad at me?" She wasn't, not directly, but the storm inside her had already entered him. That's how it begins for many empaths, not with tragedy, but with atmosphere. You learn to read the air the way others read faces. You feel before you think, and you carry what no one else will admit is even there. Charlie never questioned it. He became the sponge. At school, when a friend's parents were divorcing, Charlie felt it before the friend said a word. At church, when the pastor's voice cracked during a prayer, Charlie trembled through the whole service. He became the container for everyone's overflow. And like most containers, he stayed silent. No one told him that empathy could be so quiet it forgets how to scream. No one told him that being attuned wasn't the same as being responsible. So he thought, if I can feel it, maybe it's mine to hold. If I hold it, maybe I can fix it. This is the seduction, not of compassion, but of survival disguised as love. Because somewhere, deep down, Charlie believed something else too. If I stop feeling for them, they might fall apart. Maybe you know that feeling, that hidden contract inside your chest, the one that says, if I let go, they won't make it. But here's the truth. That contract was never fair, and it was never yours to sign. The sponge does not purify. It only absorbs, and without release, it sours. Charlie grew up to be kind, reliable, always there. But underneath the steady smile was a soul saturated beyond capacity, and no one asked how much of his pain was even his own. Have you ever wept at something small, a song, a stranger's eyes, a quiet goodbye, and felt it open something ancient inside you? Like grief that doesn't belong to a single name. That's not emotion, that's imprint, that's shadow by osmosis. Charlie didn't need to feel less. He needed to learn how to feel cleanly. But no one taught him that empathy without clarity is emotional pollution. And no one told him that kindness without boundaries becomes codependence with better marketing. What Charlie needed, what every empath needs, was never less heart. It was more spine. So let me ask you something. Who do you sponge for? Whose silence have you soaked up and called your own? And more importantly, what would happen if you finally squeezed the sponge and let the pain drain out? You're still here. That means something. It means you're ready to remember that you were never meant to carry what was never asked, not because you don't care, but because you finally do, enough to stop drowning, enough to live. Isabel never liked mirrors. Even as a child, she said they felt too alive. She grew up in Toronto, quiet, sensitive, the kind of girl who watched people more than she spoke. By 16, she could tell what someone was feeling by how they held their coffee cup. By 22, she'd fallen in love 3 times with people who didn't know how to love her back, but needed her to stay anyway, because Isabel reflected them. Not who they were on the outside, but who they were beneath the surface. She became the mirror, the one who understood without being told, the one who held pain like a poem, the one who never asked for much, just to be needed. But the cost of becoming a mirror is that eventually you forget your own face. She had the dream at 29, a cathedral made entirely of mirrors. She walked through it slowly, her footsteps echoing like old regrets. Each mirror shimmered as she passed, showing not her reflection, but a person she'd loved, a friend who'd abandoned her, a man who'd used her gentleness as a hiding place, a sister who resented her light. In each mirror she saw their sorrow, their shame, their secrets. But not once did she see herself. She began to run, mirror after mirror, face after face, all looking at her, none of them her own. She screamed, "Which one is me?" But the cathedral just echoed back the same question. That's when she woke up and wept, not because of the faces, but because she didn't know which parts of her had ever been real. Maybe you've felt that, like you've spent years being who others needed you to be, like your kindness became a costume, your sensitivity a stage. This is what happens when empathy turns into performance. You become the supporting actor in everyone else's movie, and one day you forget the sound of your own voice. Empaths like Isabel don't lose themselves all at once. They vanish slowly. Each time they say "I'm fine" when they're breaking. Each time they hold someone else's chaos with no space left for their own, and the world applauds. Because we love mirrors. We love people who make us feel seen, but who sees the mirror, who reflects back the empath. That's the danger, when your worth becomes tied to being the one who understands. You stop asking to be understood. When you spend years reflecting others, you begin to doubt that you ever had a face of your own. So let me ask you something. When was the last time someone truly saw you? Not the you who fixes, soothes, absorbs, but the quiet center behind the shimmer. Empathy is a gift, but without a core, it becomes a house of glass, beautiful, echoing, and so very easy to shatter. You are not a mirror, you are a being, and your reflection is not their story. You are allowed to be seen, not for what you hold, but for who you are when you hold nothing at all. Close your eyes. Can you picture your own face? If not, we're not done yet. Marcus never cried, not as a boy, not as a man. He built his life on logic, a solid career in London, a sleek apartment, everything in its place, everything in control. But lately, something had begun to unravel. He found himself staring at strangers in the underground, feeling waves of grief crashing through him without cause. He'd wake in the middle of the night, his chest tight, his eyes wet. Though no dream remained, his therapist asked, "What do you think you're holding?" And Marcus said, "Nothing. I don't feel much." But his body disagreed. Then came the dream. He was standing beside a stone well, ancient and cracked. The sky above him pulsed with gray clouds. Around the well, a forest, silent, still, waiting. He knelt to look inside. But the well had no bottom, only darkness, and from it the sound, not of water, but weeping. Dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, old, young, male, female. They wept not with volume, but with gravity. And Marcus, this man who never cried, began to tremble. He woke with his heart pounding, and the ache in his chest. It felt ancient. He didn't understand it then, but in time he would. That grief wasn't his. It belonged to those who came before him. His mother, who never spoke of her father. His grandmother, who fled war and never returned. His great-grandfather, whose silence was passed down like a family heirloom. Marcus wasn't just feeling, he was inheriting. And the well in his dream wasn't metaphor. It was memory, encoded in blood, stored in marrow, passed through the unspoken. Many empaths don't realize that what they carry isn't just from this life. They absorb the echoes of generations. Pain that wasn't grieved, stories that weren't told, love that was buried under fear. They become the vessel not just for others' feelings, but for ancestral residue seeking release through the most open soul. Have you ever mourned without knowing why? Felt a sadness that seemed older than your name? That's the well, and it waits for those who can hear it. But here's the danger. You cannot heal what you cannot name, and if you're not careful, the well becomes your identity. Marcus almost drowned in it. He started pushing people away, not out of anger, but because he was full, overfilled. He didn't need to feel less. He needed to go deeper, to trace the feeling back, to ask, whose grief is this? Where did it begin? And does it belong in me? The unconscious doesn't ask permission. It seeks a vessel, and if you are porous, you become that vessel. But vessels can learn. They can build structure, not to block emotion, but to guide it, to say, I will witness this, but I will not drown in it. Marcus began to name the stories. He started asking his mother questions she'd never been asked. He dug into old photos, letters, silences. He wept not just for himself, but for the river of ancestors that ran through him. And then the dream returned, same well, same forest, but this time Marcus brought a lantern, and when he looked inside, he didn't see a void. He saw light, not much, but enough to know. He wasn't lost. Sometimes empathy is how the past reaches through the present, hoping just once to be held. But you are not the grave. You are the fire, and your job is not to carry it all. Your job is to turn toward it with eyes open, and choose what stays, what ends, and what begins again. Noah was always the helper, even as a child. He was the one who brought tissues to the crying teacher, the one who stayed late to clean up after group projects, the one who noticed when someone's smile didn't reach their eyes. He didn't think of it as special. He just thought, This is what you do. You show up, you feel, you fix. But by his late 20s, something inside Noah had started to fray. He was working as a trauma counselor in New York, holding space for stories so heavy they made his bones ache. And yet he couldn't stop, not because he was asked, but because he didn't know how not to. He began having the dream, always the same. A cave, cold, vast, inside, faces, dozens of them, some familiar, some strange. They didn't scream. They whispered, each one calling his name, not a help me, but you promised. Noah would try to run, but his feet sank into the cave floor, soft, mucky like ash, and then a voice, not from the faces, but from deep within the stone walls, would say, "You made this your temple." He'd wake gasping, and always the same question. What does that mean? It wasn't until months later, while sitting alone in a coffee shop, watching a stranger silently cry behind their laptop, that it clicked. He wasn't helping anymore. He was rescuing, and not just because they needed it, but because it made him feel whole. Empathy, for Noah, had become a performance of worth, not a gift, a compensation, a way of saying, if I carry enough sorrow, maybe I'll finally matter. This is what happens when empathy is fueled not by love, but by an ache to be necessary. And society rewards it. People call you an angel, a healer, a light, but they don't see the exhaustion behind your eyes, the grief in your gut, the cave growing larger in your dreams. Here's the danger. When your identity is built on easing others' pain, you begin to fear who you are without it. You mistake compassion for purpose, and you build a temple out of ghosts. But ghosts don't rest, and they don't thank you. They haunt until you remember that it's not your job to die for everyone else's wound. So Noah began to ask questions, not of others, but of himself. Why do I need to be the one who helps? What part of me panics when I'm not needed? What am I avoiding by saving everyone else? These are brutal questions. They crack the temple walls. They make the ghosts stir, but they're necessary. Because the truth is, some empaths don't help out of love. They help because it's the only way they've ever felt loved in return. That's not evil, that's survival. But survival is not the same as healing, and temples built on suffering, no matter how sacred they look, will collapse eventually, quietly. Noah had to learn that empathy without boundaries isn't virtue. It's fusion, and fusion isn't intimacy. It's erasure. You are not here to disappear. You are not here to become the cave. You are here to remember that true presence is not about saving. It's about witnessing without merging. That's the shift. From rescuer to revealer, from sponge to soul, the cave still exists. But now Noah enters it with a lantern. And when the voices call his name, he listens and says gently, I'm not your home. I'm just passing through. And the ghosts, one by one, begin to fall silent. Grace was a therapist. She had the degrees, the certifications, the soft voice clients trusted. But what she really had What no paper could ever certify was a heart that bled for everyone she met. She didn't just hear pain. She felt it, took it in, held it long after the sessions ended. People said she was gifted, empathic, deep, but no one asked if she was okay, because Grace never told them she wasn't. In private, she cried for people she barely knew. She woke with shoulders heavy, as if she'd carried someone through the night. Sometimes she laughed and didn't know why. Sometimes she broke down over commercials. It didn't make sense until the dream came, a vast graveyard, endless rows, each headstone bearing a name, but instead of dates, there were emotions, guilt, rage, shame, despair, and at the center of it all, a single figure kneeling. It was her, placing a rose on every grave, whispering words she couldn't remember. But as she reached for the next one, something shifted. The name on the stone was still clear, but underneath it, in smaller text, was still alive. As she stepped back, looked again, more stones, more emotions, all labeled, is still alive. She woke in a sweat, confused, shaken, haunted, because that dream was a message. She wasn't just grieving what had died. She was grieving what still walked among her, the pain of others she had tried to bury within herself. Grace had become an emotional cemetery, not out of malice, out of love, out of habit, out of a belief that if she could just absorb a little more, the world might hurt a little less. But there is no redemption in carrying what isn't yours. There is only erosion. Her boundaries hadn't eroded overnight. They had dissolved, slowly, each time she said, "I'll hold this for you," and forgot to set it down. Some people collect books. Grace collected sorrow, catalogued it, named it, carried it home like a sacred relic. But it wasn't sacred. It was heavy, and it was killing her. Not her body, her center, her sense of who she was apart from everyone else's pain. Empaths like Grace often confuse compassion with housing. They believe that to care deeply is to carry completely. But this is not compassion. It is collapse in disguise. So she began to question, what am I holding that was never mine? Whose grief have I buried in my chest like a second heart? And what would it mean to exhume those feelings and lay them to rest outside of me? These aren't easy questions. They bring guilt, fear, loss of identity, but they bring something else, too: space, clarity, breath. Grace didn't stop being a therapist. She stopped being a tomb. Now, when someone cries in front of her, she listens. She offers warmth. She holds presence. But she no longer takes it home, because she understands now. Being a witness is not the same as being a container, and healing is not measured by how much of others' pain you've buried inside you. It's measured by how much of your own soul you've managed to keep intact. So ask yourself, have I become the graveyard? Am I still weeping for what someone else refuses to feel? And if so, am I ready to return their sorrow to the earth and reclaim the space where my own soul belongs? Not because you don't care, but because you finally do. Enough to let go, enough to live. Claire had always been the one who stayed calm when others unraveled. She didn't shout, she didn't shake. She held her ground like an old oak, rooted and reliable. People called her steady, warm, safe. But what they didn't see was the fire she buried every day just to stay that way. It started in childhood. Her father's temper would fill the room like smoke. Her mother would disappear into silence, and Claire, 7 years old, learned to become the calm between them, to quiet her own fear so the family wouldn't crack. She learned early, control your feelings, absorb theirs, and maybe no one explodes. By adulthood, it wasn't even conscious. She could feel someone's tension just by how they exhaled. She could sense unspoken shame in a laugh. She carried other people's storms like folded secrets in her bones, until the night of the fire bowl. It wasn't real, not exactly. It came in a dream, but it changed her life. In the dream, Claire stood in the center of a desert. Wind howled, voices swirled around her like ash. She held a bowl in her hands. It burned, but she didn't drop it. It was filled with fire. And she, weeping, trembling, believed the only way to calm the storm was to pour the fire out. But something inside her stopped her. Instead, she knelt, lowered the bowl to the earth, and whispered, "I feel you, but I am not you." And in that moment, the storm began to quiet. She woke with tears on her face, but not from pain. From clarity. She realized, for years, she had believed that love required surrender, that in order to care, she had to bleed. That empathy meant becoming the flame, not containing it. But that dream taught her something else, something radical. Empathy isn't about extinguishing fire. It's about knowing how to hold it without being consumed. The bowl was her boundary. Not a wall, not a prison, a sacred vessel, the space where her own soul could burn without spilling into everyone else's chaos. Claire began to live differently after that. She stopped apologizing for her silence. She stopped rescuing people mid-sentence. She learned to say, "I see your pain, but I don't house it." This wasn't coldness. It was warmth with structure. True empathy, she learned, doesn't mean becoming someone's emotional sponge. It means becoming someone's mirror with a spine, to feel deeply, but not drown, to love fiercely, but not vanish. The world doesn't need more martyrs. It needs more vessels, more people who can hold presence without losing their own. Claire still helps people. She still listens, still cares, but now, when someone pours their sorrow into the room, she doesn't absorb it. She breathes, she grounds, she places the fire in her bowl and lets it rest, because she finally understands. The storm outside can only calm when the fire inside is no longer afraid to burn. And that fire, contained, honored, named, becomes light, not a blaze that devours, but a flame that guides. Dr. Jonathan Hayes spent decades teaching psychology at Oxford. He lectured on trauma, attachment theory, and the unconscious mind. Students called him brilliant, colleagues called him insightful, patients called him safe, but behind closed doors, he was unraveling, not because he didn't understand the theory, but because he had become the theory. Every time a patient cried, he felt it like a sharp pull in his stomach. Every story of abuse, neglect, abandonment, he carried it home like invisible luggage. He told himself this was empathy. This was what made him good. This was the price of being effective. But the truth was darker. Jonathan wasn't just helping, he was hiding. Because when he was listening to someone else's pain, he didn't have to face his own. And when he was the one with answers, he didn't have to admit how often he felt lost. He once had a dream that shook him. In it, he stood before a courtroom. But he wasn't on trial. He was the judge. Patient after patient approached the bench, handing him their sorrow. He stamped each file, took the grief into his chest, said, "I'll carry it." But with each file, his body grew heavier, older, paler, until the final patient walked forward. A small boy, eyes wide, empty hands, and the boy said, "I have nothing left, because you took it all." Jonathan woke with a start, his chest aching, his jaw clenched, and something in him broke open. He saw the truth. Empathy, when unconscious, is not always compassion. Sometimes it's avoidance with good branding. He had turned helping into hiding. He had built a fortress of insight to protect himself from his own wound. But here's the danger. The empath who doesn't confront their own shadow becomes seduced by the illusion of sainthood. You start believing that your pain is noble, that your exhaustion is proof of virtue, that suffering for others makes you worthy of love. But it doesn't. It just makes you disappear. Jonathan had to ask himself the hardest questions. What part of me needs to be needed? What do I gain by carrying others' pain? What would I feel if I stopped helping for a day? Those questions didn't give him answers. They gave him silence. At first, it terrified him, because in that silence, there were no patients, no problems, no one to save, only himself, and for the first time in years, he sat with the boy from the dream, not to fix him, not to teach him, but to listen, to hold the ache that wasn't anyone else's, just his. This is the turning point for many empaths. When you realize that not all your compassion comes from light, some of it comes from fear, some of it from guilt, some of it from the desperate hope that if you just give enough, you'll finally be allowed to keep something for yourself. But love doesn't work like that. Neither does healing. You cannot give what you do not own, and you cannot become whole. By fragmenting for everyone who asks, Jonathan still teaches, still listens, still cares, but now he knows the difference between helping and hiding, between feeling and fusing. He no longer uses empathy as a shield. He lets it be what it was always meant to be, a bridge, not a burial ground. So ask yourself, is your empathy pure, or is it a clever mask for the pain you're not ready to face? And if it is, can you take it off, just for a moment, and sit with the part of you you've tried so long to save through others? You might be surprised at how quietly it begins to heal. Alina walks now with her eyes open, not just her outer sight, but the kind that sees from within. She still feels everything, but differently. Where once the sadness of others drowned her, now it moves through her like wind through trees, felt, acknowledged, but not stored. Marcus, too, is quieter now, not silent from suppression, but still from sovereignty. He no longer weeps without knowing why. Instead, when the ache comes, he pauses, breathes, and asks gently, "Is this mine?" Sometimes it is, sometimes it belongs to someone long gone, and either way he listens, not to absorb, but to understand. Claire tends her fire each morning. She lights a candle before her workday begins, not for ritual, but to remind herself, this flame is mine. It warms, it does not scorch, and no, he no longer runs into caves. He walks beside them with a lantern and a choice. This is the difference. They didn't stop feeling. They learned how to feel without losing themselves. They didn't become colder. They became clearer. They began the work of returning, not to others, but to the center of their own being. This is what true individuation looks like, not disconnection, not detachment, but anchoring, a rootedness in the self so strong that even when the world aches, you remain whole. Elena journals now, not just about what she senses in others, but what stirs in her. Marcus started painting. Dark shapes at first, then lines, then light. Claire learned to say no, not as rejection, but as devotion to the parts of her that once whispered, "I'm tired, eh?" And Jonathan, he still listens, still holds space, but no longer erases himself to do so. These moments are quiet. There's no parade, no applause, but something else arrives, something deeper, peace, the kind that doesn't mean everything is fine, but rather, I no longer abandon myself to fix what isn't mine. That's what returning to center means. Not becoming hard, not becoming indifferent, but becoming steady, alive, whole. Let me ask you something. Who are you? When you are not holding someone else's sorrow, who are you? When you are not rearranging your needs to avoid guilt, who are you? When you are simply you. The empath's journey doesn't end in isolation. It ends in embodiment, where you no longer confuse feeling everything with being everything, where you don't just carry light, you become a source of it. From within, sourced not by others' need, but your own truth. This isn't selfish, it's sacred. Because when you live from your center, you teach the world something powerful, that it's safe to stop leaking pain into everyone around you, that it's possible to feel deeply and remain intact, to walk through grief and stay rooted, to love and still be seen. This is the return, not to who you were before the world asked too much, but to who you've always been beneath the noise. Steady, whole, alive, Claire stands at the edge of a circle. Around her, the quiet hum of breath. 10 chairs, 10 souls, each one carrying their own flicker of fire. She watches as the youngest of them speaks. A girl with trembling hands, eyes wet but brave. I don't know who I am without their pain, she says. Claire doesn't rush to fix it. She doesn't offer a solution. she just nods, and for a moment, that's enough, because Claire knows now what she didn't know before, that real guidance isn't loud, it's presence, unshaken, steady. Years ago, she might have tried to absorb the girl's grief, wrap herself around it, call it love. But now she understands. You can hold space without holding the wound. You can care without collapsing. You can be a vessel without leaking your soul. The others in the circle listen. Some nod, some weep, but none are trying to save each other. This is the beauty of a circle built by initiated empaths. They don't reach to rescue, they reach to reflect, to remind, to return each person to their own fire. Claire steps forward. She speaks softly, but her words carry weight. You don't need to break to love, she says, and the room falls into stillness. This is what the journey has taught her. That the sponge will always drown, but the vessel, the true vessel, learns to hold, to release, to remain. There's no martyrdom here, no praise for exhaustion, no gold star for emotional starvation, only clarity, only truth. The empath is not meant to disappear, they are meant to illuminate, not by burning themselves, but by tending to their own flame first, because when the fire is yours, nurtured, known, respected, it doesn't consume, it guides. The woman in the circle wipes her eyes, breathes, and for the first time smiles without apology. Outside, the sky is turning. A soft dusk, a promise of something new, not perfection, not escape, but presence, honest, unshaken, rooted. The storm still exists, the world still aches, but now Claire walks with a bowl of fire, low to the ground, her own, and wherever she goes, she does not carry the pain of others like chains. She carries herself with such integrity that the world remembers how to carry itself, and that dear one is the true empath, not the sponge, not the martyr, not the ghost of everyone else's sorrow, but the mirror that does not blur, the flame that does not falter, the soul who feels deeply and still remains whole. You are not here to disappear. You are here to remember and to begin again.